You might have seen in the news about a year and a half ago that early Bitcoin adopter Roger Ver, known as Bitcoin Jesus, was charged by the US government for not paying his taxes, even many years after giving up US citizenship. Well, he's just resolved those charges with the US government. He's going to pay the back taxes, or what they're calling a fine, to resolve the issue. They're going to stop prosecuting him. I'm going to tell you what happened in this case, but more importantly, what you should know, because there's a lot of misconceptions here. My name's Andrew Henderson, the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We help successful people legally go overseas and reduce their taxes, get second passports and residences, and create an international asset protection plan so that you have total freedom. And the key is to do it legally. But what Roger Ver told me himself over the years is that he doesn't trust big governments, especially the US government, that they will enforce the law properly. Now, I'm not going to comment on what happened in Roger Ver's case. I don't know any of the details. I have no dog in that fight, other than I understand what he's saying. The US government really makes people's lives a lot more miserable than any other country I've seen anywhere in the world. And they did that to him about a year and a half ago when he was in Spain speaking at an event, and the police came up to him and they arrested him. And he was put in jail and he had to bail himself out. He could not leave Spain. And the US government filed for his extradition. They eventually got that. He fought that through the Spanish legal system. His appeals were exhausted, and they were about to extradite him. A process of many months went by. We don't know the details of what all was happening. There was talk that he had hired somebody in the Trump orbit to help him. But basically, all this time, he was facing 109 years in jail. Now, that's what the U.S. does. They go out and they say, hey, if someone's convicted of all these charges, because they put up everything in there, including, he forgot to put the toilet lid down. If you add it all up, it's 109 years. No one's probably going to get 109 years, but I remember at the time talking to one of the tax pros in our network, and he said, this looks like, especially for someone who, by his own admission, is a convicted violent felon for selling fireworks, this looks like, the guy might get 10 or 20 years. And you might say, well, why is a guy who gave up U.S. citizenship in the early 2010s being pursued by the United States in the mid-2020s for unpaid taxes? Well, here's what happened. The U.S. government had alleged that after expatriating, Roger Ver had kept open some U.S. companies that held Bitcoin, that he sold it but didn't tell them. And so that brings up the first misconception. Again, I don't know if that happened or not. Obviously, the U.S. government has agreed to not send Roger Ver to jail and to not prosecute him as long as he abides by whatever terms they put in place. But this is a common misconception that when you give up U.S. citizenship, you no longer owe U.S. taxes under any circumstances. If you own real estate in the United States and you rent that out, for example, you still have to pay tax on that the same way anybody else would. And it may even be under worse conditions than someone who is a U.S. taxpayer. There are other assets like U.S. Stocks that pay dividends. Depending on where you live, you could pay, again, under worse conditions, up to 30% of those dividends on those U.S. assets. There are U.S. inheritance taxes. What a lot of people don't realize, I was at a dinner party recently, we brought it up. U.S. situs assets are subject to estate tax when you die, if you have more than $60,000 of them. So that could be cash in a brokerage account. It could be U.S. stocks or other assets. And so we've actually helped some of our clients over the years through our tax pros move U.S. situs assets out of their name and into some sort of legal structure to protect themselves. If you want to be our client, you go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. The big thing here is U.S. C corporations, which is what the U.S. government said Roger Ver had. U.S. C corporations continue to be taxed no matter where you live. And so I can go and set up a U.S. C corporation. I'm not a U.S. citizen anymore either. But whatever income runs through there, now I can take deductions, I can do whatever a C corporation can do, but it is still a U.S. company for tax purposes. The same if I set up a UK limited company or a company in Australia. The fact that you don't live there, the fact that you aren't a citizen of those countries, doesn't mean that the tax just vanishes. Now, U.S. LLCs offer more tax flexibility. Now, given what the U.S. does and how they act, I don't know why people continue to push U.S. LLCs so much. I think you ought to just be out of that system entirely. Find some other way to run your Stripe credit cards. Call Nomad Capitalist. We help people do it. We have our own, Stripe account. We have our own merchant accounts. We don't have a U.S. entity at this point. And so this idea that if you just give up U.S. citizenship, you're just not going to have to pay no matter what, is wrong. What it means when you give up citizenship in the United States, which taxes you no matter where you live, subject to certain exemptions, exclusions, credits, what have you. What it means is they're not going to chase you no matter where you go in the world. And so Roger Ver got a couple of Caribbean passports. I have a Caribbean passport. Those countries don't tax you. You know, St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua and Barbuda, where he's a citizen, they don't tax you. And so he's able to travel around the world and manage his tax affairs much better than he would as an American. But if you still have some kind of asset in the United States, that can be taxed. And so the government's argument was, hey, you did not properly get out of this company. This is, by the way, one reason why you want to, if you're going to renounce citizenship, do so before you accumulate too much money. I remember Roger Ver posting back at the time when he renounced, he wrote a check to the U.S. government for the privilege of leaving. He waited too long before leaving, and so therefore he had to pay them to get out through an exit tax. If you leave before you have too many assets, you can avoid that exit tax. And so I had one friend tell me, who also renounced, he said, my regret is I didn't leave the United States earlier. I should have seen the writing on the wall. And so it can be tough. This is why I think you ought to get a second passport, and ideally multiple second passports, even if they're affordable, even if they're not the best quality. Maybe you can get one through citizenship by descent. Get those earlier so you can start to feel what freedom feels like. So you can start to see what the options look like when you travel the world on a non-US passport. So therefore, before you get too much money, you feel comfortable leaving the US one behind. I think too many Americans want to wait until they get a lot of money to get out of the US. And then you end up in a situation where Roger Ver did pay a six-figure exit tax. And some people do what the U.S. government allege he does, which is, well, I can't move my assets out of, let's say, my C corporation. So what can I do? You know, some people just can't afford to renounce at a certain point. And so you don't want to be in that position. You want to take the advice of, if you're going to leave the U.S., leave early. And I think more and more people are saying, I wish I wouldn't have waited too long. Now, here's the other thing that people often don't understand. They think that giving up your U.S. citizenship means you must be running from something. Here's the reality. You can still be arrested no matter where you live, and if the U.S. government wants you, they're generally going to be able to find you, unless you're Edward Snowden hanging out in Russia. If you're traveling around the world the way Roger and I are, they're going to find you. You're going to cross through passport control somewhere. I mean, how many of these crypto guys do they get at a border crossing somewhere in Montenegro? And the idea that giving up your U.S. citizenship means you can't be prosecuted in the U.S. is ridiculous. By the way, the idea that you can't be extradited is also ridiculous. And I think people look for non-extradition countries. I remember many years ago when I started Nomad Capitalist, one of the big search engine keywords that we looked at was non-extradition countries. And we wrote an article about it. And the article, from my perspective, was, don't rely on this. Sure, here's some countries that don't extradite, but one of the ones people talk about is the UAE. They're literally handing guys over sometimes to the U.S. government. Hey, come over here. All right, here he is. Take him away, right? I mean, just because you don't have an extradition treaty doesn't mean you won't be extradited. So the thing is, this is why I think that being from a big, high-tax, legacy brand country is going to be increasingly so toxic. Those countries are going to get nastier and nastier to their own citizens because they're losing their geopolitical power. They're losing their share of the pie financially. You know, the U.S. dollar's share of world reserve currency is down dramatically since the turn of the century. They don't like that. Would they have done this 30 years ago? Yeah, they did it to some people, but they weren't nearly as aggressive. There weren't nearly as many cases. And so, quite frankly, the U.S. is the biggest one, but France wants to impose citizenship-based taxation now. The UK is talking about an exit tax. Other countries in Europe are talking about new sorts of taxes for folks who leave. Canada was even flirting with citizenship-based taxation on the far left. And you're going to see more people like Roger Ver. I have no comments on this particular case. I don't know what happened. I don't know what all the arguments were. But I do know that the issue is having a proper legal structure, getting out before it's too expensive to do so, and having a clear direction. I realized from a very early age, I didn't really want to live in the United States. If you want to live there, I wish you all the best. I'm not angry at you. I'm just saying what I want in my life. And yeah, a lot of people don't understand that. Doesn't mean it's not what I want, and doesn't mean I shouldn't do it. And I think Roger feels the same way. And so if you have that belief that life is getting better in Asia and Latin America and Eastern Europe, and at least from an investment point of view in Africa, in many parts of Africa, Why not commit to living in that part of the world? Why not do what I've done and get numerous residence permits and citizenships across that whole global south and say, you know what? Sayonara to the high-tax legacy brand Five Eyes surveillance state West, but make sure you do it properly. Because if you don't button everything up, they might come after you because they're angry. They're angry at people like me and Roger Ver who make a scene out of it. Now, you don't have to make a scene out of it. Most of our clients do it quietly, but you want to get proper tax advice. Now, what I've also learned from this, the U.S. government and their allies, they're going to mock you. There was talk of Roger Ver potentially getting a pardon from Trump, and he made a video appeal to Trump. And someone asked on X, formerly Twitter, hey, Elon Musk, are we going to help? This is back when he and Trump were buddies. Hey, are we going to help Roger Ver get a pardon? You've been getting this guy and that guy a pardon. And Elon Musk said he's going to look into it and then came back and said, he gave up his citizenship. No pardon for Ver. Membership has its privileges. Now, fair is fair. Trump has since pardoned Changpeng Zhao, for example, CZ of Binance, who from what I saw probably got a raw deal. Certainly they wanted to stick it to him at least, let's say that. They wouldn't do it for Roger Ver. Why? They're upset he thumbed their nose at him. And yet, did he? Did I? Sure, Roger and I might be a little controversial at times, but we're following what we want to do. And hopefully, we've inspired many people in this audience to do the same thing, because a lot of people don't want to live in their country of birth, whether it's the United States or anywhere else in that declining Western world, but they needed a permission slip. I was lucky enough to get that from my parents. My dad said, even if you don't want to live in this country when you're an adult, go where you're treated best. And so I did. Most people's parents didn't tell them that. Most people never got that permission slip. So I'm here telling you, if you don't feel good socially, financially, politically where you live, you can leave. Now, Americans have the unique issue that the country's going to follow you no matter where you go, which is why it's especially important to have second passports. But you are going to see that increasingly across the West as their power drains. Do not think that if you're Canadian or Australian, it's just going to be a picnic going forward. I still think you need second and third passports and residence permits and options. And so that's one thing that Nomad Capitalist helps clients do. You can go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. We have a network of experts all around the world, including in the tax space, that we coordinate people with, to where if you're going to leave your country or if you're going to even take the step of expatriation, you need solid advice in that regard. We bring those guys in to help you, people that have helped me in many cases. You want citizenships, you want residences. We put it all under one roof. We help you plan it out, what you need, what you don't need. We've been perfecting this system for a decade now of how to help people figure out their own unique, bespoke plan. Not just some guy selling you passports. There's lots of guys shilling St. Kitts and Nevis passports, but if you actually want the results that allow you to live a free life, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. Now, here's what the government said about Roger Ver's case, and here's how it got settled. In a deferred prosecution agreement, Ver admitted that after renouncing his U.S. citizenship, he failed to pay all required taxes to the IRS when selling Bitcoin. So I would imagine in these kinds of agreements, it's like, hey, we're not going to prosecute you, but you've got to say you're a bad guy. Previously, prosecutors accused Ver of profiting from the sale of $240 million of crypto tokens and evading more than $48 million in taxes. And so there's one thing that I've seen, and I really haven't seen this anywhere else in the world. The U.S. government loves putting out press releases against people when they arrest them, when they charge them, and even when they settle with them, even when they drop the charges, they have to claim victory. It's part of the great marketing strategy that is, quote unquote, America. It is the we're always winning. And I think that's why Trump is kind of the perfect president for the United States. It's this perennial Charlie Sheen level winning. We're always winning. Remember that one? They can't ever admit, hey, we made a mistake, we did anything wrong. Never. And that bleeds into the culture. And that's why most people don't want to leave. You're seeing more and more Americans traveling now everywhere I go. Nice hotels from Sri Lanka to Portugal. It's full of Americans who are leaving and exploring the world. But the average American doesn't want to move because of that marketing campaign called America, that their government's always winning. Well, they're not. A guy didn't want to go to jail for 109 years. He wanted to live his life. He wanted to go back into business. And again, I don't know the details. Roger Ver was arrested by Spanish authorities, but released on bail in Mallorca. So that was the story. So listen, I'm the goody two-shoes of the offshore business. If you have taxes to pay, you ought to pay them. And I would say that to anybody, including Roger. But you can legally go where you're treated best. You can legally reduce your taxes to 0 or 1 or 2 or 5 or whatever it is that you want to pay. We have clients who come to us and say, hey, I'm willing to pay up to 10%. I make $1.5 million a year. Where can I keep my tax bill under $150K? And okay, hey, there's this flat tax, there's this non-dom program, there's this tax-free, there's this territorial. Here's, 14 options that work for you. Let's narrow them down. nomadcapitalist.com/apply. We can help you with that. I am the goody two-shoes though. And so pay the taxes that you owe. If you don't like them, get out. There's more chances than ever. There's so many countries you can go to now. There's something for everybody. But I will say this, out of all those other countries, I don't see any of them going after people for 109 years in jail for a tax bill. In many of them, they'd be like, dude, pay the taxes plus the penalty, and okay, maybe we won't give you a visa if you're no longer a citizen. And I would imagine Roger Ver will not get a visa. I think he did get a tourist visa back to the U.S. despite having a criminal record for selling those fireworks. I doubt that's going to be the case going forward. To be a citizen of a country where everything, it seems, is 109 years in jail, and they're coming after people, and now it's becoming politicized on both sides. I mean, probably before Obama, but as long as I've been paying attention, Obama politicized the IRS. Now Trump is going after people on the other side who have wronged him. I mean, the whole thing is a mess. I don't know why you'd want to live in that country, be a citizen of your country, keep your money in that country when there's so many other places that you can go. And when what I've learned in all my years, and what probably Roger has learned too, is nobody cares what your citizenship is. When you leave your country, maybe when you leave the country next door too, nobody cares. We had Steve Wozniak at Nomad Capitalist Live, co-founder of Apple. And he says, we leave the US, we fly to Europe. He's like, I use my Serbian passport. Europe doesn't care. France doesn't care. Are you American or Serbian? They just care, are we allowed to grant you entry? There's not this great thing. Thank goodness the Americans are here. The rest of you go over there. Nobody cares. And if you're Cambodian and got a visa, please come on in also. Nobody cares. And so when you realize nobody cares, when you realize how many options there are, why do you want to be associated with the country that screws the people to this level? I'm not saying there aren't some bad dudes in the U.S. that they shouldn't put away. The same way there's bad dudes anywhere. The U.S. seems to make quite a spectacle out of it. They seem to be quite heavy-handed about it. They seem to never really apologize when they do anything wrong. Yet they'll sell out people, even Little Marco. We love Little Marco. He sold out people who came from El Salvador. They were U.S. government informants. They weren't the best human beings, but they were apparently good enough that the U.S. government wanted to enlist them for help. The U.S. government broke their promise the way they've broken promises to so many people since the beginning of their existence. Sent them back to El Salvador to go to jail. Not here to defend drug dealers, but I am here to say, why do you want to be associated with a country that breaks its promises and is heavy-handed like this? The idea that you can't leave the U.S. too early, I think it's increasingly gaining favor. Now, you don't have to make it political. You can just silently pack up and go. If you'd like our help leaving the United States or leaving really any other high-tax Western country, we do that for a living here, including what are your options for giving up U.S. citizenship and how do you have others. You go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. Here's what I want you to know. On a day-to-day basis, people like myself, Roger, and everybody else who renounced U.S. citizenship, we're not sitting around cursing the U.S. government. We're just happy we got out.